The thick-rimmed glasses slipped down his nose as he struggled with the 80-pound rucksack during the pre-dawn PT formation. Around him, 347 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division watched as Private Daniel Chen stumbled for the third time in 5 minutes at Fort Bragg's main training ground. What they didn't know was that those same hands had piloted the Space Shuttle Discovery at 17,500 miles per hour just 96 hours earlier, and that his weakness was actually his body readjusting to Earth's gravity after spending 6 months aboard the International Space Station. Welcome to Those Who Left a Trace, where we uncover the extraordinary stories of ordinary people who changed the world without anyone knowing. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden identity, ultimate revelation, and the moment when a weak recruit saved 3 lives 250 miles above Earth, tell me in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe that true heroes hide in plain sight, hit that subscribe button and join our community of over 2.8 million subscribers who never miss these powerful stories that matter. The humid North Carolina air hung thick over Fort Bragg as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the morning mist. It was 0500 hours on a Tuesday in July, and the temperature was already climbing toward what meteorologists predicted would be a brutal 97-degree day. The 82nd Airborne Division's Alpha Company had been roused from their bunks at 0430 for what their commanding officers called motivation training, a 15-mile forced march through the Pine Barrens followed by combat readiness exercises that would push even the most seasoned soldiers to their limits. In the sea of muscular, battle-hardened paratroopers, one figure stood out for all the wrong reasons. Private First Class Daniel Chen, 29 years old, barely 5 feet 6 inches, and weighing maybe 142 pounds when fully clothed, adjusted his thick black-rimmed glasses for what seemed like the 100th time in the past 10 minutes. His pale complexion and thin frame made him look more like a graduate student who had wandered onto the wrong campus than a member of America's premier rapid deployment force. Jesus Christ, 4 eyes, bellowed Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, a 12-year veteran whose arms were bigger than Chen's entire torso. You gonna spend all morning playing with those Coke bottles? Or are you gonna get your gear squared away like a real soldier? The formation erupted in laughter. Chen said nothing, just pushed his glasses up his nose with a practiced motion that spoke of years of habit, and continued methodically checking his equipment. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as he verified each piece of gear 3 times before moving to the next item. What the other soldiers interpreted as nervous obsessiveness was actually the ingrained behavior of someone who had spent years working in environments where a single overlooked detail could kill everyone around him. "Hey, Chun," called out Private First Class Tommy Jackson, a 6 feet 3 inches former high school football star from Austin, Texas, whose chest was decorated with tattoos celebrating his home state. "My 12-year-old niece could probably handle that pack better than you, and she's got asthma." More laughter rippled through the ranks. Chen's face reddened slightly, but he maintained his silence, continuing his equipment check with the same methodical precision. His thin frame seemed to disappear inside the standard-issue Army combat uniform, and his wire-rimmed glasses caught the early morning light in a way that made him look even more out of place among the hardened soldiers surrounding him. What none of them noticed was the way Chen's eyes constantly tracked the aircraft patterns overhead, automatically calculating approach vectors and fuel consumption rates. They didn't see how he instinctively monitored wind, speed, and direction, or how his seemingly fumbling hands actually moved with precision of someone accustomed to working with million-dollar equipment in zero-gravity environments. Technical Sergeant Williams, a 17-year veteran with forearms like tree trunks and a chest full of combat ribbons, approached Chen with a mixture of amusement and what might have been concern. Williams had seen plenty of soldiers wash out during his career, and Chen had all the warning signs. Soft-spoken, physically unimpressive, and seemingly overwhelmed by the most basic military tasks. "Son," Williams said, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby soldiers to hear, "you sure you're in the right branch of service? Maybe the Air Force is looking for another desk jockey. Hell, maybe the Coast Guard needs someone to count life preservers." The surrounding soldiers snickered. Chen looked up from his equipment check, his brown eyes meeting Williams' gaze with steadiness that seemed oddly out of place for someone who appeared so physically inadequate. "I'm fine, Sergeant," Chen replied quietly, his voice barely audible over the morning wind that was picking up across the training ground. His tone was calm, almost eerily composed for someone facing constant ridicule from his peers. "Fine," Williams laughed, a sound that carried no warmth. "Boy, you can barely lift that rucksack, and we're about to do a 15-mile forced march in this heat. You're gonna fall out before we hit the first checkpoint. And then what? You're gonna call your mommy to come pick you up?" What Williams and the other soldiers didn't know was that Chen had spent the previous 2 weeks in a classified facility outside Houston, undergoing centrifuge training that subjected his body to gravitational forces equivalent to 12 times Earth's normal pull. The 80-pound rucksack felt manageable not because he was strong in traditional sense, but because his body had been conditioned for the extreme physical stresses of space travel and re-entry. The formation began to move, and within the first half-mile, Chen was already showing signs of struggle. His glasses kept sliding down his nose due to perspiration, and he had to stop twice to adjust them and wipe the sweat from his brow. The soldiers around him exchanged knowing looks and subtle head shakes, the kind of nonverbal communication that develops among military units when they've identified a weak link. "There he goes again," muttered Private Second Class Michael Davis, a former Marine who had transferred to the Army after serving 2 tours in Afghanistan. "Dude's gonna wash out before the month's over. I've seen his type before, probably some college boy who thought the Army would be like summer camp." $20 says he falls out before mile 3, Jackson whispered to his buddy, Private Rodriguez, no relation to the sergeant. "I'll take that bet and raise it to 50, Rodriguez replied. "This guy's softer than ice cream in July." But Chen kept going. His breathing was labored, his face flushed red from the climbing heat, but his steps remained steady and measured, while his body struggled with the physical demands of the march. His mind was elsewhere entirely. He was calculating orbital mechanics, running through emergency procedures for spacecraft decompression, reviewing the technical specifications for the International Space Station's new solar array installation, and mentally preparing for the emergency EVA procedures that might be needed if the current mission encountered problems. By mile 3, Chen was visibly struggling. His uniform was soaked with sweat, his glasses had slipped so far down his nose that he was constantly pushing them up, and he was breathing hard enough that several soldiers had started to worry he might actually collapse. The temperature had climbed to 89 degrees, and the humidity was making it feel even hotter. "Chen!" Sergeant Rodriguez called from his position near the front of the formation. "You need to pick up the pace. We're not leaving anyone behind today, but that doesn't mean you get to hold up the whole damn company." "Yes, Sergeant," Chen called back, his voice strained but determined. He quickened his pace slightly, though it was obvious the effort was costing him. What the soldiers marching around him didn't understand was that Chen's struggle had nothing to do with physical weakness or lack of conditioning. For the past 8 months, he had been living and working in environments where normal human movement was impossible. His body had adapted to zero gravity, where every motion required different muscle groups, different spatial awareness, and different coordination patterns. Readjusting to Earth's gravitational field was like learning to walk all over again, and the process was both physically and mentally exhausting. As they approached the halfway point of the march, Chen's encrypted satellite phone vibrated against his chest. The device was disguised as a standard-issue pager, but it was actually a direct communication link to mission control in Houston, the Pentagon, and 3 other facilities that didn't officially exist. He quickly glanced at the message, his face paling slightly despite the heat. The message was from a number that appeared on no public records. Priority Alpha, asset needed for emergency consultation. ISS experiencing critical system failure. Stand by for immediate extraction authorization. Chen's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His pace suddenly improved, not dramatically, but enough that several soldiers noticed. His breathing became more controlled, his movements more purposeful. It was as if someone had flipped a switch in his brain, transforming him from a struggling recruit into someone with a clear mission. "Look at Four Eyes go," observed Private Martinez, a combat engineer from New Mexico. "Maybe he's got some fight in him after all." But Chen wasn't thinking about the march anymore. His mind was racing through contingency protocols, emergency procedures, and the dozens of scenarios where his specialized knowledge might be needed to save lives. The message meant that somewhere 250 miles above Earth, something had gone catastrophically wrong aboard the International Space Station. As the formation took a scheduled rest break at the 7-mile mark, Chen sat apart from the others, ostensibly checking his feet for blisters. In reality, he was reviewing orbital trajectories and calculating re-entry windows in his head, preparing for whatever emergency might require his expertise. His glasses, which everyone saw as a sign of weakness, were actually a sophisticated heads-up display system that could project critical flight data, environmental readings, and mission parameters directly into his field of vision. "You know what I don't get about Chen?" Private Williams said to his squad, speaking loudly enough for others to hear. "The guy's been here 4 months, and nobody knows jack shit about him. No stories about home, no pictures of girlfriends, no talk about what he did before the army. Hell, I don't even know what state he's from." "Maybe there's nothing to know," Jackson replied, taking a long drink from his water bottle. "Some people are just boring as hell. Probably lived in his mom's basement playing video games until he got drafted. If only they knew that Chen couldn't discuss his background because 90% of it was classified at levels that required congressional approval to access. His boring personal history included classified missions to the International Space Station, 1,247 hours of spaceflight time, advanced degrees in aerospace engineering and astrophysics from MIT and Caltech, and expertise in systems that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The soldiers had no idea that Chen's careful, methodical approach to equipment checks came from years of working with spacecraft systems where a single loose bolt could result in explosive decompression. They didn't know that his quiet demeanor was a result of training that emphasized calm decision-making under extreme pressure, or that his thin frame was actually the optimal body type for extended periods in zero gravity. As they resumed the march, Chen's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was more urgent. Flash override. Situation critical. 3 crew members trapped in damaged module. Life support compromised. Immediate extraction authorized. Coordinates transmitted. Chen's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His shoulders straightened, his pace quickened significantly, and his eyes began scanning the horizon with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to looking for helicopter landing zones. Within minutes, he could hear the distant sound of rotor blades approaching from the northeast. "Incoming aircraft," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "What?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked, having overheard the comment. "Helicopter, UH-60M Black Hawk, probably modified for special operations. Twin General Electric T-700 engines, 4-blade rotor system. Distance approximately 4.2 miles. Approach vector northeast at about 150 knots. Estimated arrival in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The entire formation stopped and stared at Chen. How could he possibly know all that from a sound that was barely audible to the rest of them? "Chen, how in the hell do you know what kind of helicopter that is?" Williams demanded, his voice carrying a mixture of suspicion and amazement. Before Chen could answer, the Black Hawk appeared on the horizon, exactly where he had predicted it would be. The aircraft was flying fast and low, with the distinctive profile of a military helicopter on an urgent mission. It was also flying directly toward their position, not following any of the normal flight patterns for aircraft in the area. "Lucky guess," Chen said quietly, but his eyes were tracking the aircraft approach with the precision of someone who had spent years studying flight dynamics and three-dimensional navigation. As the helicopter grew closer, several soldiers began to notice that it wasn't following a standard flight path. Instead of passing overhead or following the designated military flight corridors, it was clearly coming in for a landing, and it was heading straight for their position on the training ground. "What the hell is going on?" Rodriguez muttered, reaching for his radio to contact base operations. The Black Hawk touched down 150 yards from the formation, its rotor wash kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris that forced the soldiers to shield their eyes and turn away. The aircraft's engines remained running, indicating that this was going to be a rapid pickup rather than a routine transport. Chen stepped forward, his entire body language transforming from that of a struggling recruit to someone who belonged around high-performance military aircraft. His movements became confident and purposeful, and for the first time since any of them had known him, he looked like he knew exactly what he was doing. Three figures emerged from the helicopter. Two were clearly military personnel, wearing flight suits with patches that most of the soldiers didn't recognize. The third was a woman in a dark business suit who moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to high-level government operations and crisis management. They walked directly toward Chen, completely ignoring the 300-plus other soldiers who were staring in complete bewilderment at this unprecedented interruption of their training exercise. "Commander Chen," the woman said, her voice carrying easily over the helicopter noise. "We need you immediately. There's been a catastrophic incident aboard the International Space Station. 3 crew members are in immediate danger." The word "commander" hit the formation like a physical blow. Every soldier within earshot stopped breathing for a moment. Chen, the guy they've been calling Four Eyes and treating like the unit's biggest liability, was apparently a commander. "What's the nature of the emergency?" Chen asked, his voice suddenly sharp and authoritative. Gone was the quiet, struggling recruit who had been stumbling through basic training exercises. In his place stood someone who clearly belonged in a crisis situation and was accustomed to making decisions that affected people's lives. "Micrometeorite impact on the Tranquility module," the woman replied. "The debris punctured the primary life support system and damaged the emergency backup. We have 3 crew members trapped in the affected section with approximately 4 hours of breathable air remaining. The automated systems are failing, and we need your expertise to develop emergency repair procedures." Chen nodded, already moving toward the helicopter. Then he stopped and turned back to Sergeant Rodriguez, who was standing with his mouth slightly open. "Sergeant, I need to report that I'm being pulled for an emergency classified assignment. Duration unknown. My commanding officer will receive appropriate notification through channels." Rodriguez could only nod dumbly. He had been yelling at a commander who apparently worked with the International Space Station and was important enough to warrant an emergency helicopter extraction. As Chen jogged toward the helicopter, his entire physical presence seemed to transform. The stumbling, awkward gait was replaced by the confident stride of someone who had run across aircraft carrier decks and space station modules. His glasses, which had seemed like a hindrance, now looked like sophisticated equipment designed for someone who needed to process complex technical information. Just before he reached the helicopter, Chen's phone rang. Not buzzed with a text message, but actually rang with an incoming call. In the sudden relative quiet, as soldiers strained to hear what was happening, his ringtone was clearly audible throughout the formation. It was a main theme from 2001, A Space Odyssey. "Commander Chen," he answered, his voice now carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life or death decisions under extreme pressure. "Daniel, thank God we reached you," came a voice that was loud enough for several soldiers to hear clearly. "We've got a critical situation up here. The micrometeorite impact has damaged not just the life support systems, but also the primary communication array. We're flying blind on half our telemetry, and the crew is reporting that the backup oxygen generation system is showing fault indicators." "Copy that, Houston. What's the current atmospheric pressure in the affected module?" "Holding at 12.8 psi and dropping slowly. We estimate complete pressure loss in 3 hours, 42 minutes if we can't get the emergency systems online." Chen's jaw tightened. "What about the emergency Soyuz capsule? Can we initiate crew evacuation procedures?" "Negative, Commander. The impact debris damaged the docking mechanism on the Soyuz. We're looking at a potential stranded crew scenario unless we can repair the life support systems in place." "Understood. I'll be at mission control in 75 minutes. Have the engineering team standing by with full technical schematics for the environmental control systems, and get me a complete damage assessment from the crew." As Chen ended the call and climbed into the helicopter, Sergeant Rodriguez finally found his voice. "Chen," he called out desperately. "What the hell is going on? Who are you?" Chen paused in the helicopter doorway, his hand gripping the frame. For a moment, he looked back at the 300-plus soldiers who had spent months treating him like a washout and a liability. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight and authority that none of them had ever heard before. "My name is Commander Daniel Chen. I'm a mission specialist with NASA and the primary technical expert for International Space Station emergency life support procedures. For the past 6 months, I've been on temporary assignment here as part of a joint conditioning program between NASA and U.S. Special Operations Command. He paused, adjusting his glasses one final time. And right now, there are 3 human beings 250 miles above our heads who are going to die unless I can figure out how to fix their life support systems with the limited resources available aboard the station. The helicopter began to lift off, its rotors creating a whirlwind of dust and noise that drowned out any response from the stunned soldiers below. As it climbed into the sky and banked toward the southeast, Chen could be seen through the window, no longer the struggling recruit, but clearly a man in his element, speaking rapidly into a headset while reviewing what appeared to be complex technical diagrams on a tablet computer. Private Jackson, who had been the most vocal about Chen's supposed weakness, stared at the departing helicopter with his mouth hanging open. Did he just say he worked for NASA? Not works for, Sergeant Rodriguez corrected quietly, his voice barely audible over the fading rotor noise. He said he was a commander who works on the International Space Station. What they didn't know, what Chen hadn't told them and couldn't tell them, was that he held dual doctorates in aerospace engineering and astrophysics from MIT, had logged more hours in space than most career astronauts, and was considered one of the world's foremost experts in emergency spacecraft repair and life support systems. His weakness during physical training was a result of a body that had adapted to zero-gravity environments, where normal Earth-based fitness was not only unnecessary, but could actually be counterproductive. The soldiers stood in stunned silence as the helicopter disappeared into the distance, carrying with it the man they had dismissed as their unit's biggest liability. Above them, invisible to naked eye but very much present, the International Space Station continued its orbit around Earth, its crew depending on the expertise of the Four Eyes recruit who had just revealed himself to be one of the most qualified people on the planet to save their lives. 7 hours later, as the 82nd Airborne Division settled into their evening routine back at Fort Bragg, televisions throughout the base began broadcasting breaking news. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and every major network were carrying the same story: a dramatic rescue operation aboard the International Space Station, where quick thinking and expert technical knowledge had prevented what could have been the worst disaster in the history of manned spaceflight. The news anchor's voice filled the day room of Alpha Company's barracks. Good evening. Our top story tonight is the successful rescue of 3 astronauts aboard the International Space Station, thanks to the extraordinary efforts of NASA Commander Daniel Chen, who directed emergency repairs from Mission Control in Houston. Commander Chen, a veteran of multiple space missions and one of NASA's leading experts in spacecraft emergency procedures, was instrumental in developing the innovative repair techniques that saved the crew's lives. The camera cut to live footage from Mission Control, where a familiar figure in thick-rimmed glasses could be seen at the center of a crowd of technicians and engineers. Chen was pointing at massive screens covered in complex technical diagrams, his voice calm and authoritative as he coordinated the most complex emergency repair operation in the history of space exploration. The emergency repair procedures developed by Commander Chen, the reporter continued, allowed the crew to bypass the damaged primary life support systems and jury-rig a temporary solution using backup components that were never designed to work together. NASA officials are calling it one of the most brilliant pieces of improvised engineering in the history of spaceflight. Private Jackson sat in the day room, staring at the television screen in complete shock. That's him. That's actually him. The guy we've been calling Four Eyes for the past 4 months. Around him, dozens of soldiers who had spent months mocking Chen watched in stunned silence as the news broadcast showed their former barracks, mate being congratulated by NASA administrators, Air Force generals, and what appeared to be very high-ranking government officials. The transformation was so complete that some of them initially didn't recognize him. The 3 crew members aboard the International Space Station are safe tonight, the anchor concluded, thanks to the expertise of Commander Chen and the rapid response of NASA's emergency teams. We'll continue to follow this developing story as NASA investigates the cause of the micrometeorite impact and works to prevent similar incidents in the future. As the news program switched to other stories, the soldiers sat in complete silence, processing what they had learned. The man they called Four Eyes had just saved 3 lives 250 miles above Earth, using knowledge and skills that none of them had even known existed. Sergeant Rodriguez walked into the day room, his face pale. He had just gotten off the phone with his commanding officer, who had received what he described as a very interesting call from some very important people at the Pentagon. "Listen up," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding authority. "I just received word that everything we witnessed today is classified at the highest levels. Not the rescue operation. That's all over the news. But Chen's assignment here, his real identity, his background, all of it. As far as anyone outside this unit is concerned, Private Chen was transferred to another assignment for medical reasons. Anyone who discusses what happened today will be dealing with people who have security clearances that are way above our pay grade." The room remained absolutely silent. Finally, Private Williams spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sergeant, how long was he really here with us?" Rodriguez consulted a folder he was carrying. "According to his official file, 6 months. But I just learned that he was only here between space missions. Apparently, NASA has some kind of formal arrangement with Special Operations Command where their astronauts train with elite military units to maintain physical fitness standards that are compatible with space operations. So, he wasn't actually struggling with the physical training?" Jackson asked, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Rodriguez shook his head slowly. "Son, Commander Chen has been in space more times than most of us have been on airplanes. His body was adapted to zero-gravity environments. What we interpreted as weakness was actually him trying to readjust to Earth's gravity between missions. According to what I was told, it's a common problem for astronauts who spend extended periods in space." The implications of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. For months, they had been mocking and dismissing someone who was not only vastly more skilled and knowledgeable than any of them, but who was actively serving his country in ways they couldn't even comprehend. "Those glasses," Private Martinez said quietly. "They weren't just regular glasses, were they?" Rodriguez consulted his notes. "According to what I was told, there's some kind of advanced heads-up display system. He was probably receiving real-time data feeds, mission updates, and technical information directly in his field of vision that we couldn't even see. The technology is apparently classified above our level. As the soldiers processed this information, one question kept coming up: how had they so completely misjudged someone who was clearly extraordinary? The answer, Rodriguez realized, was depressingly simple. They had looked at the surface, Chen's thin frame, his thick glasses, his quiet demeanor, and made assumptions based on military stereotypes and Hollywood portrayals of what heroes were supposed to look like. They had expected their heroes to be physically imposing, loud, and aggressive, not realizing that the most important battles were often fought by brilliant engineers and scientists who looked nothing like action movie stars. 3 weeks later, the 82nd Airborne Division received an unexpected visitor. A black sedan with government plates pulled up to the main gate, and after a brief conversation with the guards involving several phone calls to very high-ranking officials, it was waved through. The car drove directly to the barracks where Chen had been stationed, followed by a second vehicle carrying what appeared to be security personnel. Commander Daniel Chen stepped out of the lead vehicle, but he looked completely different from the struggling recruit they remembered. Instead of the ill-fitting army uniform, he wore a crisp navy dress uniform covered in ribbons and insignia that most of the soldiers had never seen before. His posture was perfectly straight, his movements confident and purposeful, and his thick-rimmed glasses now looked like exactly what they were: sophisticated equipment, worn by someone who needed to process vast amounts of complex technical information. Sergeant Rodriguez was called to meet him at the barracks entrance. As he approached, Chen stood at attention and rendered a perfect salute. "Sergeant Rodriguez, Commander Chen reporting as requested, sir." Rodriguez returned the salute, still somewhat bewildered by the complete transformation of the man standing before him. "Commander, good to see you again. To what do we owe the honor of your visit?" "I wanted to personally thank you and your men for the training opportunity, Sergeant. The physical conditioning program here was instrumental in helping me maintain Earth-normal fitness levels between space missions. Your unit's professionalism and dedication to excellence made a real difference in my preparation for emergency operations." Rodriguez struggled to find the right words. Commander, I have to ask, during your time here, were you ever actually having trouble with the physical training, or was that all part of some kind of elaborate cover story? Chen smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Rodriguez had ever seen from him. Sergeant, I was definitely having trouble with the physical training, but not for the reasons you and your men assumed. When you spend months at a time in zero-gravity environments, your body adapts in ways that are difficult to understand unless you've experienced it firsthand. Muscle mass decreases, bone density changes, cardiovascular conditioning shifts, and your spatial orientation becomes completely different. He paused, looking around at the familiar training ground. What you witnessed wasn't weakness in the traditional sense. It was a physical reality of readjusting to Earth's gravitational field after extended periods in space. The process is both physically and mentally challenging, and it requires constant monitoring and gradual conditioning to prevent injury. So you really were struggling with the marches and the physical requirements? Absolutely, but it was medically necessary. NASA requires all astronauts to maintain specific fitness standards between missions, and training with elite military units like yours is one of the most effective ways to rebuild the kind of physical conditioning that's compatible with both space operations and Earth-based activities. Rodriguez nodded slowly, beginning to understand. Commander, I have to apologize. My men, and I treated you poorly. We didn't understand what you were going through, and we made assumptions. Sergeant, Chen interrupted gently, you and your men treated me exactly as you should have. I was a soldier in your unit who was struggling with physical requirements. You pushed me to improve, you maintained standards, and you never gave up on me. That's exactly what good leaders and good soldiers do. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several soldiers who had heard about Chen's visit. They approached hesitantly, clearly unsure how to interact with someone who had revealed himself to be so far above their level in terms of skills and responsibilities. Commander, Private Jackson said, stepping forward with obvious nervousness, I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you during your time here. If I had known who you really were. Private Jackson, Chen said, cutting him off but not unkindly. You treated me like a soldier who needed to perform better and meet standards. That's your job as a member of this unit. The fact that I had a different background and different challenges doesn't change the fact that you were doing exactly what you were supposed to do. But Jackson wasn't finished. Sir, I have to ask, during your time here, did you ever get frustrated with us? We were pretty rough on you, and looking back, it seems like we were being unfair. Shun considered the question carefully before responding. Private, do you know what the most difficult part of my job actually is? No, sir. It's not the zero gravity, or the radiation exposure, or even the risk of dying in space. The most difficult part is the isolation. When you're on the International Space Station, you're surrounded by the most sophisticated technology humanity has ever created. But you're completely cut off from normal human interaction. You can't grab a beer with your buddies after work. You can't play pickup basketball. You can't even have a normal conversation without radio delays and communication protocols. He paused, looking around at the soldiers who had gathered to listen. The 6 months I spent here, getting yelled at by sergeants, struggling through PT, eating terrible mess hall food, and bunking with other soldiers, it was the most normal I had felt in years. You treated me like a regular person, not like some kind of scientific curiosity or celebrity. That was exactly what I needed. The soldiers exchanged glances, beginning to understand that their treatment of Chen hadn't been a mistake. It had been exactly what he had been looking for. Commander, Sergeant Rodriguez said, can I ask you something that's been bothering me? Of course, Sergeant. That day when the helicopter came for you, you knew it was coming before any of us could even hear it. You identified the exact type of aircraft, its approach vector, and its estimated arrival time. How was that possible? Chen smiled. Sergeant, when you spend as much time as I have monitoring orbital mechanics and tracking spacecraft movements, you develop a very acute sense of how objects move through three-dimensional space. Aircraft are essentially just spacecraft that haven't left the atmosphere yet. The acoustic signature, the flight characteristics, the approach patterns, they're all predictable if you know what to look for. And you could tell what kind of helicopter it was just from the sound of its rotors. Every aircraft has a unique acoustic signature based on its rotor configuration, engine type, transmission system, and airframe design. A UH-60 Black Hawk sounds different from a UH-1 Huey, which sounds different from a CH-47 Chinook. When you spend as much time around aircraft as I have, you learn to distinguish between them automatically. As the conversation continued, more soldiers gathered around, drawn by curiosity about Chen's background, his missions, and what it was really like to work in space. But what struck them most was how normal and approachable he seemed, despite his extraordinary experiences and responsibilities. "Commander," Private Williams asked, "what's it actually like up there?" "In space, I mean." Chen's expression grew thoughtful, and for a moment he looked up at the sky as if he could see through the atmosphere to the station orbiting high above. "It's beautiful beyond anything I can describe to you. When you see Earth from 250 miles up, you realize how small and fragile our planet really is. There are no national borders visible from space, no political divisions, just one incredibly beautiful blue marble floating in the infinite darkness." He paused, his voice growing quieter and more serious. "But it's also the most dangerous environment human beings have ever worked in. You're surrounded by a vacuum that will kill you instantly if anything goes wrong. The radiation exposure, the temperature extremes, the constant risk of micrometeorite impacts. Every system, every procedure, every backup plan is designed around the fact that space doesn't forgive mistakes. Is that why you were so precise and careful about everything?" Jackson asked. "We noticed that you were always checking and rechecking your equipment, even for basic training exercises. When you work in an environment where a single loose bolt can cause explosive decompression and kill everyone around you, attention to detail becomes more than just a habit. It becomes survival instinct. In space, there's no such thing as close enough or good enough. Everything has to be perfect every time." As the discussion continued, the soldiers began to appreciate not just Chen's technical expertise, but the mindset and discipline that had made him successful in such an unforgiving environment. His quiet demeanor wasn't weakness. It was a controlled calm of someone who had learned to function under extreme pressure. His obsessive attention to detail wasn't neurosis. It was a survival mechanism of someone who worked in an environment where perfection was literally a matter of life and death. "Commander," Rodriguez said eventually, "I have to ask, are you going back up there?" Chen nodded. "Next mission launches in 5 months. We're installing a new generation of solar arrays and upgrading the station's power distribution systems. I'm the primary mission specialist for the EVA operations." "EVA?" several soldiers asked simultaneously. "Extravehicular activity. Spacewalks. Someone has to go outside the station and physically install the new equipment in the vacuum of space." The soldiers stared at him in awe. The man they had been calling Four Eyes and treating like a liability would soon be floating in the vacuum of space, wearing only a spacesuit for protection, performing complex repairs on one of humanity's most sophisticated machines. As Chun prepared to leave, he turned back to the assembled soldiers one final time. "Gentlemen, I want you to know that the training I received here was invaluable. Not just the physical conditioning, but the reminder of what it means to be part of a team and to serve something larger than yourself. When I'm up there," he pointed toward the sky, "I'm not just representing NASA or the scientific community. I'm representing every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine who has ever served this country." He paused, his voice carrying a weight that none of them had heard during his time as a seemingly struggling recruit. "The work we do in space, the experiments, the research, the technology development, it all ultimately in service of the same mission you're training for down here. We're all working to keep America safe, strong, and at the forefront of human achievement." As Chen's car pulled away from the barracks, the soldiers stood in respectful silence, watching until the vehicle disappeared from view. They had learned something profound about making assumptions, about the difference between surface appearances and true capability, and about the many different ways that people serve their country with distinction. Later that evening, as the soldiers sat in the day room, discussing the day's revelations, Private Martinez made an observation that would stick with all of them for the rest of their military careers. "You know what the most incredible part of all this is?" he said, looking around at his fellow soldiers. He never once corrected us when we called him Four Eyes or made jokes about his glasses. He never got angry, never tried to put us in our place, never even hinted that he was anything other than what he appeared to be. Why do you think that was? Jackson asked, his voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and regret. Rodriguez, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke up. Because he understood something that we didn't. He knew that respect isn't about how other people see you. It's about how you see yourself and how you conduct yourself when nobody's watching. Commander Chen never needed us to know who he was because he already knew who he was. The room fell silent as the soldiers contemplated this wisdom. They had spent months trying to break down someone who was already stronger than they could imagine, and in the process, they had learned more about themselves than they had about him. 5 months later, as the soldiers of the 82nd Airborne Division conducted their pre-dawn PT formation, someone pointed to a bright streak moving across the early morning sky. It was the International Space Station, clearly visible as it passed overhead in its precisely calculated orbit. "Think he's up there right now?" Private Williams asked, shading his eyes against the rising sun. Sergeant Rodriguez checked his watch and nodded. Launch was 3 days ago. According to the NASA website, they're starting the solar array installation today. As they watched the station disappear into the morning sky, the soldiers stood a little straighter, knowing that somewhere up there, 250 miles above Earth, the man they had once dismissed as weak was floating in the vacuum of space, performing repairs that would benefit all of humanity. The lesson they had learned was simple but profound. True strength doesn't always look like what you expect it to look like. Sometimes it wears thick glasses and struggles with a rucksack. Sometimes it speaks softly and avoids confrontation. And sometimes it's prepared to save lives in the most dangerous environment known to humanity, while everyone around it is focused on earthbound concerns. But the story wasn't over. 6 months after Chen's return to space, the soldiers of Alpha Company received another surprise that would forever change their understanding of what they had witnessed. It was a Tuesday morning in March when Master Sergeant Patricia Hawkins from the Pentagon Special Operations Liaison Office arrived at Fort Bragg. She was accompanied by a NASA Public Affairs officer and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself only as Mr. Peterson from Washington. The entire company was assembled in the main briefing room, where Hawkins stood before a large screen displaying the NASA logo and several photographs of the International Space Station. "Gentlemen," she began, "you're about to receive a briefing that is classified secret. What you're about to learn cannot be discussed outside this room without proper authorization." The screen changed to show a photograph of Chen in his full NASA uniform, standing in front of what appeared to be a spacecraft. 6 months ago, you trained alongside Commander Daniel Chen during a conditioning rotation with your unit. What you didn't know at the time was that Commander Chen was preparing for the most complex and dangerous mission in the history of human spaceflight. The screen displayed a series of technical diagrams showing the International Space Station's solar array systems. The mission you witnessed being launched was not a routine maintenance operation. 3 weeks ago, Commander Chen and his team discovered a critical structural failure in the station's main power systems that threatened not only the current crew, but the entire future of the International Space Station program. The soldiers listened in stunned silence as Hawkins explained how Chen had spent 87 consecutive hours in space, performing emergency repairs that required him to work in a vacuum of space for longer periods than any human being in history. The procedures that Commander Chen developed during this emergency have been adopted as standard protocols for all future space operations. His work quite literally saved the International Space Station and ensured the continuation of American leadership in space. Exploration. The screen showed video footage of Chen working outside the station, his figure tiny against the backdrop of Earth rotating below. Commander Chen's actions during this mission resulted in his receiving the Congressional Space Medal of Honor, the highest award that could be bestowed upon a NASA astronaut. He is only the third person in history to receive this honor. The briefing continued for another hour, detailing Chen's contributions to space exploration, his role in developing new life support technologies, and his ongoing work on missions that would eventually take humans to Mars. As the presentation concluded, Mr. Peterson stepped forward. "Gentlemen, the reason you're receiving this briefing is because Commander Chen specifically requested it. He wanted you to understand that your role in his preparation was not incidental. It was essential. The physical and mental conditioning he received during his time with your unit was directly responsible for his ability to perform under the extreme conditions he faced during the emergency repair mission. He paused, looking around the room. Commander Chen asked me to tell you that he considers every one of you to be part of his mission team. Without your training, your challenges, and yes, even your skepticism, he would not have been prepared for what he encountered in space. The soldiers sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what they had just learned. The man they had mocked and dismissed had not only saved the International Space Station, he had done so using skills and conditioning that he had developed, in part, during his time with them. 3 days later, packages began arriving at the barracks. Each soldier received a personally addressed envelope containing a photograph of Earth taken from the International Space Station, signed by Chen with a personal message. Jackson's read, "Thank you for pushing me to be better. The view from up here is incredible, and I think about all of you every time I see it. Commander Chen." But the most significant package arrived for Sergeant Rodriguez. Inside was a small piece of metal mounted on a wooden plaque, along with a certificate of authenticity from NASA. The plaque read, "This fragment of the International Space Station solar array was removed during emergency repairs conducted by Commander Daniel Chen. Presented to Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez and the soldiers of Alpha Company, 82nd Airborne Division, in recognition of their essential contribution to the success of this mission." Below that, in Chen's handwriting, "Thank you for teaching me that strength comes in many forms, and that the most important battles are often won by those who never give up, even when everyone around them thinks they should." 2 years later, as Rodriguez prepared to retire from the Army after 20 years of service, he received one final communication from Chen. It was a video message sent from the International Space Station, where Chen was serving as a mission commander for a 6-month rotation. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Chen's voice came through clearly despite the 250-mile distance. "I wanted to reach out to you as you prepare for your retirement. Your leadership and the training I received with your unit have been with me on every mission I've flown since leaving Fort Bragg." The video showed Chen floating in the station's main laboratory module, surrounded by the sophisticated equipment that had become his everyday work environment. "I've been thinking a lot about the lessons I learned during my time with Alpha Company. You taught me that leadership isn't about being the loudest or the most physically imposing person in the room. It's about setting standards, maintaining them even when it's difficult, and never giving up on the people under your command." Chen paused, looking directly into the camera. "You never gave up on me, even when I was clearly struggling. You pushed me to meet the same standards as everyone else, and you treated me like a soldier first and everything else second. That's exactly what I needed, and it's exactly what good leaders do." The video continued for several more minutes, with Chen describing how the lessons he had learned at Fort Bragg had influenced his approach to leadership in space, where the stakes were literally life and death. "I'm sending this message because I want you to know that every time I look down at Earth from up here, I think about the soldiers who helped prepare me for this moment. You and your men were part of something much bigger than any of us realized at the time." As the video ended, Rodriguez realized that the most important lesson from Chen's time with Alpha Company wasn't about the dangers of making assumptions or the importance of recognizing hidden talent. It was about the fundamental truth that excellence comes in many forms, and that real strength is often found in the quiet determination to keep going when everyone around you thinks you should quit. The story of Commander Daniel Chen and the soldiers of Alpha Company became a case study that was taught at military leadership schools across the country. It illustrated the importance of maintaining standards while remaining open to the possibility that the person struggling beside you might be fighting battles you can't see, carrying knowledge you can't imagine, and preparing for challenges that will test the very limits of human capability. And high above Earth, invisible to the naked eye, but very much present, Commander Chen continued his work among the stars, carried with him the lessons learned from the soldiers who had unknowingly helped prepare him for humanity's greatest adventure. In the vast silence of space, surrounded by the infinite darkness and the brilliant light of distant stars, he remembered the dusty training grounds of Fort Bragg and the men who had taught him that the most important victories are often won by those who never ask for recognition, never demand respect, and never give up even when everyone around them thinks they should. The universe is vast and full of wonders beyond human imagination, but sometimes the greatest discoveries are made not by looking up at the stars, but by looking more carefully at the person standing right beside you, struggling with their own challenges and fighting their own battles, quietly preparing for moments that will define not just their own lives, but the future human achievement itself. Some heroes carry rifles. Some carry medical supplies. Some carry the tools to repair the most sophisticated machines ever built. And some carry the knowledge to keep humanity reaching for the stars, one mission at a time, one small step at a time, one quiet moment of perseverance at a time. They had learned never to judge a book by its cover, never to assume that strength always looks the same, and never to underestimate the quiet person with thick glasses who keeps checking their equipment with obsessive care. Because sometimes that person is exactly who you need when the world needs saving, when humanity needs protecting, and when the future itself depends on someone having the courage to keep going when everyone else thinks they should quit. Commander Daniel Chen had taught them all something important about heroism. It's not about being the strongest or the loudest or the most impressive. It's about being ready when you're needed, having the skills to make a difference when it matters most, and never giving up on yourself or the people around you, even when the odds seem impossible and the challenges seem insurmountable. In the end, the soldiers of Alpha Company had learned that the greatest heroes are often hiding in plain sight, wearing thick glasses and struggling with heavy packs, quietly preparing for moments that will change the world. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to be part of their story.